So a lot's been happening since my last video. The first tadpole has popped his front legs. I've got some more right behind him. These are a mix of Vanessas and the Lukes. Unfortunately, I am running out of room really quick, so I'm going to have to come up with something here soon. But in the meantime, the Vanessas, which I did a video on about 2 months ago, and put them in this enclosure, are about due for their new home, which is what this video today is about. For this build, I'm using a ReptiZoo 18 by 18 by 30 inch knockdown terrarium. Now, since it is a knockdown, I do need to seal up the back like I have in the past with the others. The rest of it here, pretty sure everyone is familiar with hanging the cork panels up. Fortunately, I had kind of a gap here, so I just took the simplest method possible, which was just to take a strip of foam, squeeze it in there to make sure no one gets behind it. You may also notice this isn't the typical silicone I'm using. I ran out of my Kraken bond, so I had to order some more. Now, the one drawback to this terrarium is this vent panel. I didn't want to use a piece of glass, so I just smeared some silicone over top of it and sealed it up. And the next step after hanging up the background is I went around with some random cork bark panel pieces and started mounting them in different positions around the terrarium so I could carve them out later. Now here I went to try to use the wire brush on the drill again, and as you can see, it's too much of a mess. The dust is everywhere. So I ended up stopping what I was doing at this point, went to my computer and opened Fusion 360 and designed this. Now this is kind of a prototype here. The screw in there, really not a good shank for the drill. It does slip quite a bit, but it did take some getting used to in the beginning. But as you can see here, the dust is really not as prevalent as it is using the wire brush. It's a lot of nice big chunks come off. And here's a nice comparison. You can see on the left, I'm using the wire brush, all the dust that's everywhere. And on the right, it's the wheel I made up, and there's no dust, very minimal dust. After a few minutes of using this, I really started to get the hang of it. I got the feel for how much pressure I could put down on it, and a little slippage still, but not as much as the beginning, and it really kind of worked out well. As you can see here, everything is blended in really nicely with this. There's no dust, and I've got all this nice fine material here I could probably start using as part of a substrate mix, which I might start testing out on the next build. Once I was finished carving, I let the terrarium sit for a week and gave it a few rinse downs in the meantime. Now at the end of the week, it was time to get ready to start planting. And here again, I'm using the 2 inches of filter foam as the drainage layer, covered by some weed guard. And I knew I was going to build up the back pretty deep with some substrate, so I decided I'd throw some scrap pieces of foam in there just to help build it up a bit. Well, once I was happy with the substrate depth, I thought I'd change things up a little bit here and try to incorporate some different material into this build. The stone I'm using here is called Blue Slate River Stone. I can't remember where I got it from, or else I'd put the link in the description. Kind of like it. It's nice and smooth. There's no jagged parts on here. Now, since I was going to put the stone down, I didn't want areas where there was a lot of substrate visible in between the stone and the leaf litter. So I decided I'd put some leaf litter underneath the stone, and as it gets wet, it's going to sink down a bit. So no exposed substrate for the frogs to get into. Once the stonework was done, I could start laying in the pieces of wood. I thought about attaching these to the background of silicone, but then I thought maybe I would just not do that this time in case I wanted to switch things up, move things around. Now here I do have to admit that this did take a little longer than what you see here in the video. I really spent a lot of time playing with the placement of the wood. Besides wanting to make it look good, I did want to make sure that I put these pieces in some really stable positions, so that way there was no chance of them falling over or getting the frog pinched underneath it. You also have to keep in mind, once the plants start growing in, a lot of the roots, especially on the creepers, will start to hold everything in place really well. Now here I'm just taking some sphagnum and kind of filling in some holes. Not really necessary. There's no tiny gaps for them to get stuck in. But these will make good places to put some moss or any other kind of plants. Once I was done with that, I started the planting. I really didn't go too crazy with the plants in this one either. First plant up here is Selaginella copper tips. I really like how the Selaginellas look, especially the flatter ones that tend to creep more over surfaces. Now sitting on top of that sphagnum, it should be nice and cozy there. But this one was actually kind of a pain in the butt. When I went to remove the soil from the pot, each one of these strands just kind of fell out of it. So luckily I didn't have to break anything. All these pieces I'm putting in here have a root structure on them already, so they should acclimate really easily. Now to get some different texture and a little bit of color in here, I went with some monolina red. Now I'm not usually a big fan of epipremnums or pothos, as most people like to call them, but this plant here really caught my eye. I like the shade of green it has in the shape of the leaves. And obviously being an epipremnum, it's going to acclimate really well and probably take off way faster than all the other plants in here. Since this plant was unpotted and it was covered in topsoil, which I rinsed off, I didn't want the roots to dry out, so I covered it in damp sphagnum. The plant everyone loves to hate, some Ficus pumila, and some more Selaginella. I really haven't had a lot of luck with this Puriciana variety. It seems to melt really quickly for some reason, at least for me. And the last plant for this build is going to be random potted fern. It just said fern on the pot, so hopefully it doesn't get too big. If it does, I'll just cut the fronds off. But I also made sure that this one, my substrate was really dry. I've had it in the bucket for probably about 2 months since my last build. So I really wanted to make sure it was nice and moist for the plant roots to go into. And now that the planting was done, it was time to add the cleanup crew. And here we have the usual suspects, the temperate springtails and dwarf white isopods. Now I'll probably do the same thing I have in my last builds. I didn't show them, but I usually add springtails and isopods in once or twice a week, just to make sure there's a good population once the animals go in. But here we have it. This build is all done. By the time the next video comes out, I'll have the Vanessas in here, their nice new home. And thanks for watching. See you next time.